Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome to Measures of Green Urbanism. Today we are going to start with our lecture on transit oriented development, which will be the last lecture of this course. In the previous lectures we have discussed about various aspects related to accessibility, and in there we have also discussed about the impact of public transit. So, when we are talking about transit oriented development, we are actually talking about public transit and the development that can happen in and around transit stations, what are the positive aspects of it, and how we may be able to provide guidelines so that the development is oriented towards sustainability measures or indicators. So, if we are talking about settlements, then development has always been transit oriented. This can be explained when we look into the initial theories of economic geography that tried to link land use along with transportation. So, settlement forms, particularly when we are talking about the earliest type of settlement forms where we had agricultural land use or villages. So, in there we have the first theory of agricultural land use by Johann Heinrich von Thunen, who discovered a certain pattern within villages while he was roaming about in the German countryside, and he found out that invariably the land use, particularly where will be the agricultural land use located, where say cereal cultivation is happening or grain cultivation is happening, where is say firewood cultivation is happening, compared to where cattle are being reared and where dairy is being produced. So, all these land use which is particularly related to agricultural land use or villages, they had a certain pattern, and he realized that this particular pattern emerged with respect to the ease of transporting these goods to the town village center, which housed the marketplace originally, and the ease with which these products can be transported from various areas of the villages to the main village center, and the overall cost of transportation of these materials from their respective areas to the village center. So, from there we have the agricultural land use theory, and later we find this agricultural land use theory being used to develop an urban land use theory, which was done by William Alonso in 1964. So, if you look at the images present within the slide, the right hand side image is related to the agricultural land use theory, where immediately near to the village marketplace we have the area where dairy will be available. Then we have areas of wood that will be used as a fuel, followed by grain cultivation, followed by cattle, places of cattle. So, from there on, this particular theory was translated to urban land use, and we get the bid rent theory as a result. So, in bid rent theory also we find that the code urban area should have a commercial land use, followed by an industrial land use, and then ultimately towards the periphery of the urban area we should be having residential land use. These theories are well established, and when you search for them you can get additional details about them. So, these theories were one particular characteristic of both these theories are that they are all both monocentric theories, meaning in both areas, be it the village area or the urban area, both of them have one center. So, the cities or the settlement that emerge are circular in form. In reality, we do not find settlements which are circular in form absolutely. So, we have seen that whenever an urban area expands with respect to population, it also expands spatially, and it changes from a monocentric form to a polycentric form. And if area it successfully transcends from the monocentric form to the polycentric form, this transition is helped by interlinking or association with public transportation, which is not just availability of modes and their frequency, it is also helped by the transportation network. So, the network aspect of transportation along with the availability of public transportation, considering the reliability factor, they make a polycentric form efficient and functional, and they are linked with the type of development that will happen at the local level as well as at the overall city level. So, gradually we see that at a larger scale or at a regional scale, we have these kind of a city development where we have a core city area, then we have an inner urban area followed by a suburban area. These three areas together comprise the urban aspect or the urban part of a region, followed by from the suburban area or just immediately after the suburban area we have the urban fringe or the rural urban fringe, and then we have the urban periphery followed by the rural hinterland. So, the urban fringe, urban periphery and the rural hinterland are actually the rural part of the area, which has certain influence or which gets influenced by the core urban areas. So, this pattern emerges because of available theories as well as different factors that impacts land consumption, the way population density impacts different areas depending upon the way income inequality is present or the way wealth distribution happens. So, as because core city areas do have higher land prices, so thereby land consumption gets impacted by that. So, those who can consume land at a higher price can go for renting or acquiring areas in the core city, otherwise they usually go towards the periphery or the urban rural fringe for their land consumption. We also these pattern of where how the density, population density will pan out over an urban area is also dependent on the availability of transportation, particularly the transportation network. So, if transportation network allows for is uniformly distributed, we can get a more or less uniform distribution. Otherwise, we see that densities are higher near the transportation links or the roads. So, this particular pattern, the settlement forms also gets impacted by car dependency. In absence of reliable public transit, which is say if it is not uniformly available, we find that people are dependent on privately owned vehicles for their daily commute, and that also further impacts the land use in a way that people who can have their own private vehicle, they can move towards the periphery and they can actually commute to their places of work. This much, the volume of commute does directly impact traffic congestion, and it also leads to an outward push and sprawl of monofunctional land uses towards the periphery, and it leads to a densification of the suburban area as compared to the core city area or the inner urban area, particularly in terms of residential densities. So, from there we see that if particular policies are not framed to deal with the type of development that will happen in and around transit nodes, it normally follows a higher density of development around the transit nodes or the transit network. Generally, it follows that. So, transit oriented development was the term was coined by Peter Calthorpe in 1993 in his book The Next American Metropolis, and it is actually a multi-domain planning strategy. In here, the main focus is to develop a dense mixed use community around transit nodes, and that will be less dependent on personal vehicle use, particularly less dependent on cars, and that will provide a boost towards public transit ridership. The context of this theory is US based. In India, by virtue of very high population density that our urban areas have, and if we look into the modal share of public transportation, if public transportation is available, we find that our context is widely different from the US's urban context. So, again the focus of transit oriented development was to build mixed residential land use or an area near the transit nodes which will be having a mix of land uses, and it will also be creating a walkable environment so that people who will be living in these high density mixed use development can put away their car, their personal vehicles or private vehicles, and they can use more active modes of travel to access the public transit options for travel. So, overall it will also will be impacting, it will be having a better environmental impact by reducing car usage and thereby reducing the CO2 emissions as well. But transit oriented development is not just related to high density development and public transit ridership. There are different dimensions of transit oriented development. So, the 6 important dimensions of transit oriented development that does impact its performance and that should be used while we evaluate the performance of a transit oriented development are these. We start with density. It is not just population density, it is also the residential density, its density of buildings, its density of job availability or opportunity. So, while we had discussed different measures of accessibility, we have spoken about these opportunities. So, ease of reaching different opportunities. So, in here density is not just population density, and that gets the impact of this high density immediately gets shown, or is felt when we look into the ridership aspect of it. So, usually places where the density is very high, the ridership of public transport which is reliable and high quality is also very high. Then we are discussing about diversity, and here the diversity is particularly related to different land use mix. So, in US we do not have mixed land use traditionally. In India, our urban areas are mixed land use by nature. So, all urban areas which have developed organically or which existed since a long time, they are all organic. So, we can define them or we can identify them very easily by looking at their transportation network. By looking at their road network, we can clearly say which cities were developed organically vis-a-vis which cities were planned. So, we normally do not see a grid iron type road network in organic cities. Again, so diversity is something that is a very important domain or dimension of transit oriented development. Next, we are looking at design. The design aspect again looks into this mix aspect along with availability of green open space. So, when we are talking about diversity, we are talking about having different land use mix. That land use mix also includes green open space, and the design aspect of it actually is there to support this diversity so that people can actually live and there is a high degree of livability present within these influence areas within or the influence zone of transit oriented development, where people can literally walk very easily in order to access the transit stations. From design, we are discussing about distance to transit. So, this is given by the influence zone. We know that how much distance a person can travel without going through lot of stress depends upon the age of the person, depends upon the overall health conditions of the person as well. So, typically it has been considered that a normal healthy person can walk very comfortably up to about 800 meters. This assumption is again taken from neighborhood planning theory developed by Clarence Perry and Stein, and this will vary in Indian context. So, in Indian areas we often see people walking till about 1 kilometer very easily if the climatic conditions or the weather conditions are fine. So, this aspect of distance to transit will vary depending upon which zone, climatic zone the particular urban area is situated in, and of course, the health condition of the person. But it is not a specific 800 meter number is arbitrary at most. So, it has a range should be provided. So, distance to transit in case of TOD has to be such that people can easily travel this distance without undergoing physical stress. So, this will actually lead to a higher walkability. A higher walkability will mean that people will not be using their private motorized vehicles to access transit, and they can literally walk or use other active modes of transportation to access the transit stations. Next, we look at destination accessibility. So, destination accessibility is also impacted by the previous factors. So, within those 6 factors, the first 3 factors are very important or has certain higher priority. So, if the first 3 factors are catered to, the remaining 3 factors actually act as supporting factors. So, together all 6 dimensions help in creating a very high quality transit, public transit, and a successful transit oriented development. The image shown in this slide is related to urban area footprints or urban extent. This was developed by Matthew Hartzell in 2013, and this actually gives us a good idea about the density. If we compare the density of New Delhi, which is present in here as in comparison to say New York or Los Angeles or Chicago, we find that Indian cities are already much more dense. So, what people are thriving to reach with in terms of density, in terms of compactness, that is already existing in Indian cities. Indian cities typically do not have sprawl by definition. So, Indian cities are high density development, and this is yet not clearly codified or categorized as what is actually high density, what makes something high density, what makes something very compact, what makes something low density. This is yet a qualitatively decided category, more or less. There is no final word related to this. So, now when we look at this particular aspects of TOD dimensions, the way TOD has performed over the world is varied, because the initial focus was to have a high density development in and around transit stations, that along with less car dependency or less car usage and more walkable or having a diversity of land use which will also be affordable. So, when we are talking about diversity, that does not mean that it should only be enjoyed by one socio-economic group. That diversity also has to be ensured. Now, when we look into all these factors and when we try to evaluate the way transit oriented development has performed, then it varies significantly. So, World Bank had actually given this guidelines with regards to what should be or how an inclusive transit oriented development should be created. And it has spoken about mass transit capacity and network characteristics that will lead to higher accessibility. It discusses developing compact regions with short commutes and resilience of areas. So, providing ease of access to transit for different areas and to plan and zone for mixed income neighborhoods at corridor level. Because we have seen that if these specific guidelines are not enforced, then there is a question of one particular socio-economic group enjoying the benefits of a higher of the transit oriented development or high quality public transit. Because we have seen that whenever an area has good access to public transit, their price, land price or real estate prices, they are very high in compared to areas which do not have access to public transit. Thereby, people who already own land within this TOD influence zone, they have much better benefit rather than people who live away from this TOD zones. So, depending upon areas which are which were already developed before introducing TOD in an area, in such areas it is very difficult to actually achieve the level of diversity in terms of the land use mix and particularly in terms of the socio-economic group or the having the mix of socio-economic groups within TOD influence zone. So, this part becomes very difficult. Having a land use mix, particularly a mix of commercial area, residential area, that is present, that is still possible to a large extent, but having a good mix of different socio-economic group is a weak point in here, particularly if we are looking into transit oriented development that exists within already existing urban areas or already developed urban areas. In greenfield cities or in greenfield type of development where everything is created from scratch, in there it is easier to hold land or for specific income groups. Otherwise, it becomes impossible to implement directly. So, similarly, in existing urban areas where people might already be owning vehicles, private vehicles, for them to set aside their private vehicle and go and take up more active modes of travel is again highly questionable. Because in Indian areas at least, or in Indian urban areas, a car is not just for mobility or better mobility. A car is a symbol of, a car is an asset actually, and it is a symbol of a social, it provides or proves a certain social status. So, it is not easy for people to change from their private vehicles directly to more active modes of travel until and unless there is a combination of push and pull factors in effect. So, managing private vehicle demand is also given as a guideline to make places, to make the TODs more inclusive. Now, if we look into the performance of TODs, particularly in terms of last mile connectivity, we see that in major cities, though one of the principal focus of TOD has been to use more active modes of travel, to use more put away their own car, we still see that public transit is not always having the highest modal share. We are actually seeing that in many places people are using private cars far more. And in Indian cities, particularly where public transit is available, public transit does have huge ridership. That has never been India's problem. So, performance of TOD, once we look into all dimensions, they vary. If we simply look into ridership as a TOD indicator, then Indian cities will perform very well. Indian cities will actually perform much better than many other cities if we take all other dimensions also in consideration. The only aspect that we need to look into is having for adequate diversity and adequate mix, particularly inclusion or access to green open spaces. Because in Indian cities, majority of the people walk for the last mile connectivity if climatic conditions are good. So, in Indian cities we find that different indicators are present or given, particularly in order to demarcate the TOD influence zone. We find the price impact of TOD to be felt till about 3 kilometers or 2.5 kilometers from the TOD stations. It will differ if the TOD is metro oriented, or if the TOD is suburban rail oriented, or the TOD is bus oriented or a BRTS. So, these are the different measures of influence zone. So, usually by distance to transit we are looking into again this universally accepted value of 800 meters, though it is as a value this is kind of abstract. So, it is something that can be easily, people can easily walk within a 10 minutes time, a distance that can be covered. Time is again a 5 to 10 minutes walk. Access mode can be walking, can be cycling also. If it is cycling, the distance increases. The catchment area for urban area can be higher, is actually much higher, and in suburban areas it is again kept to be 800 meter. If it is a BRTS, this area can be reduced to 400 meters. The main mode is we can talk about local street transit, rapid street transit. So, these also vary significantly again based on trip purpose. For trip purpose we commonly look into travel towards walk. So, within India these are the different standards for TOD influence zone. So, usually again 500 to 800 meters is the original standard for TOD influence zone, followed by variations depending upon the city as well as depending upon the mode. So, in India, if we look into the overall TOD performance, the TOD performance is very, very good, particularly for cities which have population which are the metropolises. So, we have seen it in our previous lecture also that TOD performance, particularly regarding metro or which is focused on metro, is very good. Ridership is significant, and development around these TOD stations were already high density development to begin with. But we had done a small study in Kolkata regarding the car ownership of households which were living within TOD zones as compared to households living outside TOD zones. And at least for Kolkata, we found out a very interesting thing, that is, households which were living within TOD zones had more number of cars than households living outside TOD zones. So, this is again, this pattern is not just true for Kolkata, this pattern is also true for multiple cities across the world, where it has been seen that a kind of gentrification does happen within TOD influence zone, where those who are belonging to higher income group or having better income opportunities do have the benefit of TOD, having access to TOD, particularly the people who can afford such high land prices. So, if we have to talk about inclusive TOD and the to look into the performance aspect of TOD, particularly looking into sustainability aspect, then less car dependency, use of more active modes of transport, these are benchmarks we have yet to achieve. Not just in India, across worldwide, but from Indian perspective, we have to think on these lines in the coming years and of course presently. So, with this, our course comes to an end. In this course, we have discussed about different aspects of Sustainable Development Goal 11. We have looked into different measures related to affordability, livability, accessibility, water and sanitation, and green open space. This is by no means a very detailed work that you can read, but this is like an introduction. So, if you are interested, you can explore individual aspects differently. Multiple resources are available. So, thank you for your attention.